All right, thank you everybody for coming to ACM today. My name is Matthew Airy. ACM stands for the Association for Computing Machinery, so that helps disambiguate if you're new here. Today's presentation is going to be on universal design with a focus on American Disabilities Act compliance and how that can translate into having better design that can meet a much broader audience with reduced issues in liability and legal liability. So we're going to get started, but we're going to start with our general typical layout, which is we'll go over committees, and there are a few committees. There's a few special announcements that I like to make on that. So first, we've got the guest speaker officer, and he is busy. He couldn't come today, but he's already done an excellent job, and I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but next week is going to be on neural networks, and that presentation is going to be done by Brother Grimmett. Am I right, Sylvain? He'll find out. So yeah, Brother Grimmett is going to do a presentation on neural networks, and that's, in other words, that's artificial intelligence in computer science lingo. So then we have projects and activities. Doug's a little bit late, so if he gets here before the presentation starts, then we'll fall back to him. Online committee. They're dutifully encased in their headphones, but they can give some announcements. You're jacked in.
So we have decided upon a framework that we're going to build our new website on. We're going to go with Ruby on Rails because of the applicability and marketability of it after school. So we'll get our first real planning meeting this Monday, and this will be where I think most of the programmers will start to have fun, because we're going to start typing, not just focusing on making it look good, which it will, don't worry, Michael, but it'll be all, I'm sorry, Michael. I was staring at Michael. But yeah, I think that's about it. So this Monday at 5, Austin 212, I believe, is the room that we've been having it in, and it'll be a lot of fun.
All right, and a little word on Ruby on Rails. Yes, it's written in Ruby, and it's probably not everybody's favorite programming language, but the platform actually has inspired a lot of other frameworks to change their ways, and has been a wealth of rapid web development application frameworks. And a lot of the ideas that you will learn in Ruby on Rails will translate really well into other platforms and other frameworks and other programming languages as well. You'll also be able to see what a real MVC design pattern in programming is versus pseudo MVC design patterns that you might end up coming across if you're going to do a website in C# and use Visual Studio to generate an MVC pattern. It's just folders I hear. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's fun and it's really interesting. You'll get to see things. You'll be able to create things and see results very quickly in Ruby on Rails. So I think that you guys would find it very beneficial. Then Artificial Intelligence Committee.
Yep, we're just going to briefly go over some more by AI, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the AI games. And then following that, we're actually going to having a discussion on neural networks. So kind of thinking that we're having a presentation on it right now.
Yeah, it is.
Yep, and that'll be tonight at 5:30 in Austin.
Right, great. Next, Code Challenge Committee. So, a little news on the Code Challenge Committee Chair. Hayden Jones, he had to resign because he had way too much going on in his life and he couldn't give enough time and energy to the position. So we quickly changed gears and got Alan. You stand up, Alan, and introduce yourself. Alan to be the new Code Challenge Committee Chair. Everybody was really impressed with his presentation on Arch Linux, and he has also got the technical know-how to actually understand the code challenges that he will find on the internet. And one of the things that we're going to end up doing between Code Challenge Committee and Artificial Intelligence Committee is we're working on getting a budget, and people who solve really hard code challenges will get prizes. I think the big thing that we want to get our hands on is a bunch of Steam gift cards for prizes. If you are not motivated to be doing code challenges, that should motivate you. If you do not know what Steam is, it is the iTunes of video games for computers. All right? So Everybody likes video games, typically, since we're all male.
There's also other resources for just gaming. There's a lot of modeling and
Oh yeah.
program stuff in there as well.
There is also other software that is geared to development and things like that. Sound mixing, video editing, game development, things like that. There's a lot of other things there, but generally it's well known for its game library. Just acknowledge that fact. So, Alan, you want to tell them about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Alan. I'm in a couple of like senior level classes here this year. But yeah, I have a bunch of ideas for code challenges. I think I'll advertise stuff on Slack, and hopefully people will hopefully people will be motivated to come if there's big cards and stuff.
Oh yeah. When we start having the code challenges is when we finally are able to kick off ACE event that will happen every week. We are still wrestling with the campus approvals people. They do not like the way that we put a logo on our poster. And so even though we have like approval to use the logo from our parent organization, so there's just a lot of other concerns, and we're just dealing with like that stuff right now. But then we'll get the posters up and it'll be across campus. We'll get attendance, and Doug is here. So Doug,
Yes.
what's going on?
So far we have the code challenge, the
Code space.
the code space. That is the poster on it yet?
Still working on the approvals.
I thought they're doing the proof right now.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna make an unofficial announcement and have it start tomorrow anyway then.
All right.
So code space is about from 5 to 7 every Friday night, especially to work on basically anything, learn new projects like VR or gaming apps, or just learn new programming techniques in general. Basically, there's no official teaching. It's nothing. It's basically get a group of people together and work on personal projects or learn something new. Basically, basically like a makerspace. Basically, have everyone that wants to make something and just either have fun, not just make something. Just do what I'm going to do is gaming, making stuff. Just about if you know, it's basically every weekend, Friday. It's a nice group activity.
Thank you.
And we will be supplies like VR kits and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to use other stuff like Mindstorms and stuff.
We do have VR kits. We do have Mindstorms. So you can experience real virtual reality if you have a smartphone. That will work. Okay, so now we've moved on to the presentation. Jeffrey Dunster is here. He is BYU-Idaho's online communications coordinator, and he is going to be teaching us a bit about universal design that is used in software development. And so I'll turn the time over to you.
Okay.
So,
All right, let's see how well this streams. Do we have to switch over to?
no, he's got it.
All right. Okay. So my name is Jeff Dunster, and I work in university relations, which may sound really far away from anything computers and development. But my background is I've been working with web development and communications and technology support, programming, all sorts of development for the past 21 years now. I have a master's in information systems management from BYU and have spent almost my entire career in educational areas trying to understand how to use technology to improve communication, to teach better, to basically transform lives. I have a personal hankering for technology. I'm playing around with home automation stuff. Arduino, Raspberry Pi. I have built a greenhouse under my house, and I'm actually going to motorize all the blinds and put all the sensors in and automate everything so that I and my wife don't have to remember. That's why you do technology, make life easier. Right now it's a lot harder because you have to build all that stuff, but it's fun. So what I wanted to present on today is a kind of a different point of view on technology. Those of us in this room have an affinity for technology, specifically computed technology. But how many of us use doorknobs? Do you realize that that is a technological innovation? It hasn't always existed. The way we use doorknobs today with integrated locks have been a recent development. last 100 years, 200 years. We've had doorknobs of various types going back a few centuries, but doorknobs themselves have only, as we think of them, have been a relatively recent development for securing a home, keeping a door shut, keeping the temperature in a house nice. I mean, there were reasons that we invented those things. So what I wanted to talk about, though, is that it's very easy for us to say, I know the world and I know how to make it better. But I wanted to focus on the fact that all of us actually have disabilities, problems with the way we use the world or approach the world that others actually have strengths in. And in our case, we have a strength in technology, adapting technology, developing it, thinking through complex algorithms, making things happen in an automated sense. How many people in the world can't do that? Quite a few. There's a reason we get paid to do what we do. And it's easy to look at other people, be it a grandmother or a child or somebody who is a neighbor that needs help, and say, oh, they just don't have that ability. Or awesome. I want this talk to help you recognize that we are all disabled. I mean, how many of you could be president of the United States? How many of you could, well, this might be a delicate question, but how many of you can just get married? It took me a while. I was 30 when I got married, and there were reasons. It was actually a disability for me to be able to associate with all the women that I actually wanted to date and get married to. And I think that when it comes to the abilities we have, we are blind to our disabilities. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time exploring what really is happening out there. The first thing you need to know is that when you start talking about disabilities, everyone's going to go, oh, ADA compliance. How many of you know what ADA stands for? Okay, anyone want to say it?
American Disabilities Act.
Okay, Americans for Disabilities Act. It was a law put in place to safeguard the interests of a minority. What's really funny to me is that if you actually get to know the minority, you'll find that more and more of us are actually included in the ADA Act for one reason or another. If you have a learning disability, if you have any sort of visual impairment like colorblindness, which is actually 1 in 4 men have a colorblind gene that actually changes something about their vision compared to other men. That's pretty common. In this room, 4 of you, 3 of you, would actually have some form of colorblindness. In fact, does anyone actually have colorblindness? I've had a developer that was very interested in design who was red-green colorblind, but it was his particular genetic trait was not just red-green, but it was hard for him to see most colors. They were very faint. And it comes in many varieties. And he was actually very interested in design because he knew if he could make designs work well for him, everybody would be able to use it in theory. There's black and white colorblind, there's red-green colorblind, there's a variety of that disability. And if you get to know, you'll start to recognize all these varieties. And some of you may have a little bit of them. Does anyone have another visual impairment, which is nearsightedness? Do you have to wear glasses? Okay, visual impairment. Very common, and computers bring it to us for the most part. Technically, the ADA compliance, the ADA Acts covered everything. Access to buildings, any government service was to be accessible to everyone. So what do you do about somebody in the far extreme who is blind and deaf? And maybe even stuck in a wheelchair, can't use their arms and legs, quadriplegic. Whoa, that's so rare, I don't have to accommodate that. Well, the law says you accommodate everybody. And so what that meant was in architecture, architects were saying, wait a minute, I love stairs. I can't use stairs in my designs because not everyone can navigate a stair. Well, at first there was this resistance, ADA compliance. Compliance was the key word. So what was the outcome if you didn't comply with the act? What power does the government have?
Shut you down.
It can shut you down if you're a government institution and you won't do it. Well, government owns you, so they're going to make you change or fire you or do whatever. They have incarceration, which this law actually doesn't have built in that you'll get imprisoned for it, thank goodness. Fining, they can actually fine you. Now, the way the government does it isn't just, hey, you're not doing it, you're a private residence, those were excluded. They said, we are going to withhold money. So if you're a public library, well, we won't give you funds to exist if you don't comply with ADA compliance. If you're a university, BYU-Idaho is actually subject to it because we receive grants, federal aid for students. With ADA rules, no student here could be given federal aid. So how many students would stay here? Not very many. So, you know, motivation. So the fundamental aspect of ADA compliance is one of compliance and then lists. Here's what we want you to do. They have pages and pages of rules for all sorts of interactions you might have. And it covers things like mental disabilities, some situational disabilities. If you're not in this place and you need the service, we need to try to make it available to you online. You know, there's all sorts of rules. This is a short list of web compliance. This is a checklist. So how many people have seen an ADA compliance checklist for the web? Anyone? Okay. Doug, he was in my office. This is a quick reference list. It says, hey, check this, check this, check this. If you do all these things, you're ADA compliant by the base reference rules. You know, things like making sure that all of your videos have captions so that a blind person can watch a video and see it. You know, we might take that for granted, but 15, 20 years ago, that was very, very rare. But television started to progress. If you have an image on a page, you have to have alt text that describes the image. So imagine if you couldn't see and you visited a website and it pops up an image to you, and your screen reader is reading it to you and it says image and goes on. You go, did I just miss something? There's an image there. To a visual reader, they'd say, wow, that image was big, and they were highlighting all these people that were taking a picture that was showing that they were all included in this group. But the blind person had no inclusion in that. They passed right by it, went on, and the message of that page was included in the image, and they totally missed it. So good alt text would describe that image and portray the exact same message to somebody who couldn't see it. Whereas typically a programmer would say, oh, I have to have this alt text in here. Image of a group. I'm done. You know, they didn't understand the context of usage that came with that. So these checklists are handy to kind of get familiar with what's happening, or maybe to remind you of what you need to do, but in and of themselves, they don't really motivate you. They don't help you make an experience accessible to more people. So ADA compliance is not a checklist, and there are many, many checklists to help you understand the scope of it. Okay, so we talked about it's the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is what the act is really about. Access for people who typically wouldn't. Equality, everybody is included. It doesn't say these are the disabilities and it's just a narrow set. So you have to be 90% blind to qualify as blind. No, it just says if you consider yourself blind, we have an act to help you. Opportunity. How many of you have been kept out of something you wanted to do because of an ability you didn't have? So you want to go in the Air Force and be a pilot, but you have poor vision. You want to, what would be some other examples? Well, let's say you might want to go to med school, but you have a hard time memorizing stuff. I mean, everybody has opportunities that they would like to take, but they may be actually excluded because of an ability or lack of it. The ADA Act was to try to level the playing field and get more people involved and help them actually have access. Inclusion. So it's, again, it includes everybody, but it also wants them to be a part of an experience. So if you went to a workspace and you had a coworker who was in an accident and suddenly couldn't type, they are not supposed to be fired for that. The ADA Act says will help them continue to contribute. So now they have to come up with ways to help them continue to code when they can't use their fingers anymore. Could be some of you. So when you really understand what this is fundamentally about, it's really about setting the boundaries for everybody, wide open. And we as a church institution have an added piece of that. Everybody has worth, is related to us. We have a duty to be compassionate to help them. So why would we ever exclude 1, 2, 10, 5 million out of the world? We would include everyone as best as possible. The challenge with this is that there are some things people just can't do, and we have to find ways for them to do it. And maybe those ways don't exist yet. So there's still this exception area that says we know that the computer could potentially do this, but it doesn't do it yet. Take some of, and you guys are right on the forefront of that. As you develop new technologies or you're playing in new spaces, trying new things, they're not fully accessible yet. But over time, people figure out how to include more and more people in those experiences. Take virtual reality. It's just now happening. We're getting enough to try virtual reality with more and more people. But blind people still can't quite experience virtual reality the way we would. But we are finding ways to include them. Giving them tactile interfaces that they can actually explore space in 3 dimensions with them and get tactile feedback, auditory feedback that's simulated so that they have a sense of where they are in a space. They can still have experiences. And in some cases, because of a disability, they have a different experience that is heightened beyond what we would have. And finding how to let that happen in your technology is one of your calls. Okay. So this is a quick list of some disabilities. And this is very loose, self-identify with some of these. I want you guys to raise your hands if you feel you have any visual issue whatsoever. Glasses. Okay, almost half the room. How about an auditory issue? Poor hearing, okay. What about, this is one my wife has. Her ears work great, but her brain isn't actually interpreting the auditory signals perfectly. It's called auditory processing. Lecture and go, huh. I wish somebody had written that up on the board because I just couldn't get it. It didn't. The brain did not connect the words to the meaning reliably, especially when somebody's speaking fast. Does anyone have something like that? Okay. Mobility. How many of you are able to use all fingers, hands, digits quickly? Does anyone have like arthritis or not work quite right? You know. In our case, fingers are where things happen when you're dealing with technology. But there might be other types of mobility. Some people can't turn their heads very well, so they have a hard time participating in an experience that requires physical movement. Besides actual physical mobility, walking around, things. Comprehension. This was growing in capability to we're becoming more aware of how you can try to do something or try to understand something, and the way you experience it can make or break your ability to comprehend it. Some of you read better than you listen. Some of you see better than you feel. You know, the comprehension is all of your abilities tied into your brain's ability to actually register what happened. And that actually is playing. All of you have strengths and weaknesses in comprehension. If you were to be dropped in the middle of a physics class, you may not actually be able to comprehend the majority of what you experienced if you had not already had a lot of experience in physics. There would be words used, there would be mathematics on the board that you may not have exposure to or be able to read. Comprehension is an outcome of all of your abilities. Attention. How many of you have attention issues? Okay, there's a few more hands on that one. Okay, and that can be for any host of reasons. It could be chemistry. It could be boredom. Oh, I've seen so much of this before. Whatever. Attention is actually everybody's problem. They all have thresholds where they can't handle anything. They're bored. They don't want to be there. They actually can't comprehend it. Whatever reason. How many of you listen to music and code at the same time? Okay. Technically, that's an attention problem. Your brain has to have something else going on for you to actually accomplish what you need to hear. There's all sorts of ways that your experiences are influenced by all these. What about technology? Are there people who don't have computers, or don't have internet connections, or don't have a mobile experience when they need one? How many of you are still on dial-up? In my house, I actually can't get cable. I can't get anything fast. I could get DSL, 1 megabit connection. It's almost not working. Technology is an issue for most people around the world. So is it a disability? It's inhibiting their abilities to do something? Sure. Culture. A lot of the time, we have an experience with our technology or a service that's provided that's in the context of cultural norms. So in the Middle East, there are parts of the Middle East where a woman may not be in the same room with a man unless they're married. That's a technological issue. No, it's not. Is it a physical disability? No, it's just a cultural norm that says we will not do this. In a virtual space, they can. Though there are people in their areas saying that maybe they shouldn't be associating in virtual space either. We don't let them do it in a physical space. Social media is kind of a weird place where that all clashes. We have cultures all over the place that are trying to use the same experiences, and some of them are inherently biased to our fundamental culture. How many of you go to use web services and you see a folder and you immediately know that that file folder represents a container of information? There are people who culturally have never encountered a manila file folder, wouldn't recognize that icon, and have no clue what that means until they've been introduced to that culturally through use of technology. So a lot of this is required to actually experience what we do. Language, of course, there's lots of languages out there. How many of you is English? Taylor? Do you consider that a disability sometimes? Okay. You might be really, really good at English, but you still have the challenge of 2 languages in your brain. I speak Spanish. I grew up with French as a secondary language. I learned ASL. There are times when I can't get the English word. I don't know why. It's just not coming. I have a Spanish word for it, or I can tell you what the French word would be, but the English file cabinet is stuck closed. I can't get it open. That's a disability. It happens. Okay. So I want to show you my first realization that what I did with the world wasn't what everyone else does. I don't know how many of you have seen this. It's a fun little video. Let me know if this doesn't carry through to the presentation. We'll do what we can to adapt. Is that going to come through, do you think? Yeah. I didn't check the audio on this. Where's our audio? Uh-oh, we don't have audio.
Check it on the computer in the bottom right corner.
Yeah, it's muted. Somebody thought they'd be smart. Once we've got real stuff playing.
I'm using my work with okay, you're going to use to look at all applications of the browser.
About the text. All right. So, old technology, it was even old when I saw it the first time. But there were several things I took away from this. Number one, a disability often leads to an excess in another ability. That auditory processing ability, way above me. In fact, in some disabilities can make them so capable in other areas that they actually are impatient with our inability in their space. And so what I wanted to kind of expose you guys to is this idea that you all have disabilities. And in some of your cases, your disability is actually accentuated another ability beyond what other people have. So understanding the others around us, the abilities they have and the disabilities they have, and being able to meet their needs as well as we want to meet our own. So as an engineer, we try to solve problems. Often we start with our problems because we understand them. We feel like we can find a solution to them. How often do we take our ability to solve a problem and apply it to somebody else's problem? We're paid to do that, but do we intuitively try? So the fundamental challenge that all of you face with ADA compliance is not one of do this or be sued, do this or lose your funding. That's the lowest level of compliance out there. That's kind of the lower level kingdom that you could make it to. What we really want to understand is how to make things accessible to everybody out of compassion. So universal design is the big picture. ADA compliance is the Americans' disabilities rules, and other countries have their own disability rules. But this is actually the meta rule, the big picture. We want to design things for everybody. So how many of you have used a curb recently that was cut down to the road level? How many of you have recently used a curb that wasn't cut down? I mean, they're almost nowhere now. I mean, you find it in really old parts of town to make them wheelchair accessible. But how many of you appreciate those? How about walking on a sidewalk and you get to an uneven portion of the sidewalk? ADA compliance says it has to be leveled out, it has to be cut down so that a wheelchair can go across it. How many of you tripped over something that wasn't compliant? I mean, it helped me, the fact that that law was in place for a wheelchair. I'm not on a wheelchair, but it sure saved my toe from taking that edge. That's what universal design is about. It is about saying we need to make all these rules work, not just for the use case, that blind person, but because making it better for the blind person makes it better for me. Screen readers are actually made, when you understand how a screen reader works, the computer is interpreting the text for a blind person. And it has to understand the complexities of HTML, and page layout, and the way they experience it. At the same time, it's making it easier for Google to scan that page, to recognize everything that's on it, and provide better search results to everybody. And in fact, it can scrape that information and present it to me in a Google card. So being standards compliant for ADA accessibility makes all the systems work better. That's the fundamental principle of universal design, and one that you guys could actually go out and study. So equitable use, making something accessible to everybody. Flexible in use. You want something that you can build once and use in a variety of contexts. If you can create a data set and use it on a website and in a mobile app, that's flexibility in use. We often think this way, but we don't take it far enough for everybody else. Simple and intuitive. By who? By what measure? Well, if you make it simple and intuitive to the least experienced user, those of us with a lot of experience can fly right through the experience. We do this today. All of us are familiar with web experiences using a website. How many of you read every word on a web page? None of you do, unless you have a particular drive that makes you read every word. There are some people who do that, but in the early days of the web, there were many people who read every word on a page because the web experience was so unique site by site that you had to learn it all. You had to read it top to bottom to know how to use this page, this site. We've gotten to the point where we have standards and interfaces that make us much more capable. We don't have to read all the information that's presented. Perceptible. You have to be able to recognize what you're seeing, be able to actually experience it. A blind person, again, is having a different perception of your experience than you have. Tolerance for error. Has to have a lot of room for people to figure things out on their own. If you walk up to a door and pull a push, you've got a problem. But they have to be able to recover from that and not be locked out of that building forever. Okay, low physical effort, that's always hard to measure. Size and space appropriate. Some of this is about bigger experiences that are not technological, but if you're dealing with technology, a lot of this still applies. Okay. So to me, understanding other people and their experiences is not something you get out of a list or a book or a presentation like this. It comes through long-term exposure and effort to learn how others think. An experience that each of you build and share with somebody else is going to be better. Having an association like this where you can actually code together, you can have contests, you're getting exposure to other people's perceptions and how they work with your code or your experience. This experience, this technique here in this book will make a big difference to the way you work in your whole career. If you can take time to, for 5 minutes, sit down with you, you will suddenly have insight. Now, not perfect insight, but insight into their perceptions, into their abilities and disabilities. And the more you get that exposure, the wiser you are with how you build and how you craft. So I just wanted to summarize this book briefly. I have it here if anyone would like to thumb through it after we're done. It's written by the guy who wrote Don't Make Me Think. How many of you had to read this for your classes? Anyone? This book is really about making intuitive experiences and saying if you make somebody think too hard, you already failed, even if they do figure it out. In that book, he mentions that if you sit down with users and test them, you will be able to figure out how they really think and what problems you have with your content. So test for 5 minutes. You don't have to spend hours and hours. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars. You can take what you're building and go find somebody else and say, hey, use this. You don't want to lead them on, you don't want to tell them a ton about it, but you want them to try it, and then you observe, and you try to figure out what their problem is in their doing. Serious problems are easy to find. In 5 minutes with 5 users, you'll probably find the top 3 problems that you should be fixing right now. So if you did 5 users for 5 minutes once a month, you would probably have enough things to fix for a month. If you run out of things to fix and you think it's awesome, go test another 5 users. I'll bet they're going to have a common problem between them, and you'll be able to fix that. The point here is you can rapidly iterate through, make improvements without a lot of delay. And you will gain insight into the diversity of your users and how they think. It is different from you. Observation is really where it's at. You can't just go give it to somebody else. It's important for you to observe because you're going to start to intuitively pick up the way they are experiencing the app, or the way they're experiencing the device, the way they think about it, what the problem is they're trying to solve. And you can't get that by guessing. You have to actually observe their use. You have to admit this to yourself. You are blind until you test. You built it to solve your problem. Therefore, it's perfect for you. You're not going to see the ways it's imperfect until somebody else tries to use it. And in big companies, you'll be trying to solve a problem without ever being able to really see the user. And so you're at a disadvantage until you intuitively try to do this. Find your blind spots. Go out and test. Continuous testing is required because you'll never find all the problems the first go. In fact, you'll often introduce new problems as you solve others. So you keep going. And then if you don't have something to test, like you haven't built something yet, you can test somebody else's stuff that's similar. You can test a competing product. You can actually, you need to get better at testing itself, the process. Okay. Here on campus, if you're interested in disabilities themselves, you can take experiences you're building, whatever, and go to the disability office, and they'll hook you up with somebody with a disability. And you can sit down with them and say, hey, I'd like to use this. And then you watch, you observe, and you learn from that experience. They can help. Have a disability yourself. They're there to actually help you in whatever the form of the disability is. You can also do searches for ADA compliance and universal design. There are a ton of videos that will show all these different disabilities in action, how they use mobile phones when they're blind, and that's just mind-blowing stuff to expand your awareness and help you understand other people, the way they work. Okay, that's all I had. I wanted to spend a little time with questions. Any thoughts that have come to you as we've talked about this? Okay.
So you showed us that video from a while ago, and I was just thinking about how much things have progressed with that sort of technology.
Is it all kind of the same idea though? It's like reading through that, or has there been any major advantages that have been really cool?
Well, it depends upon the disability. In that case, visual disabilities, that technology of a screen reader has gone from a specialized piece of software that cost $1,000 to $2,000 20 years ago to it's built in. Windows accessibility and Mac accessibility readers are all built into the experiences. Phones will now do a lot of those basics. But what's sad is that in the 20 years since that video was first recorded, we haven't seen fantastic leaps in accessible interfaces. In part because the technology is changing so fast that the screen reader is always a few steps behind. Now, when we had the browser wars between Internet Explorer and Netscape browser and stuff before they lost that, we had, at that time, a separation of standards. People were building to very different types of web experiences. And screen readers were being pulled apart. They couldn't read the same code from all these different websites that were built for the different browsers. And so for 10 years, when IE dominated, it kind of, accessibility was languishing. It was hard for them to build all the tools that would work in all these different spaces. But with HTML5 and mobile devices, people got their sanity and said, we're done with wars. We are standards compliant. We want to make experiences through websites that work on all devices, all browsers, all the time, no arguments, no specialization. And everyone had learned their lesson from the wars and jumped in and said, then we will build compliant code on compliant websites. Screen readers suddenly said, well, thank you. Now we can actually predict what we're going to encounter when we use the public web. And so they have moved forward really quickly. This is an example of universal design. If you design something for the disabled and outline your content and use all the right headings and all the right code to make the site work according to semantic meaning and not just ableism, you're actually supporting screen readers, you're supporting mobile devices, you're supporting search engines. All those different uses of that code, of that content, are supported. And that's because of standards themselves. And so just bear in mind, that's what a standard does. Sometimes a standard is inhibiting, and you'll say, well, I want to do this, but I want it to work in this new VR app. Well, every time you step outside of standards compliance, you are leaving behind all of the supportive technologies that are already developed. It hasn't progressed a lot, but there is great research into auditory presentation, where somebody who can't see can hear really, really well. And so they actually present the visual experience to them through auditory noise. To us, it sounds like noise. To them, it's actually, there's a really cool TED video about this. They put on headphones, and they have a camera. The camera is able to see a room, and it translates the room into auditory signals. So it's basically reading a section of the photo or the video and translating that into an audio sound in the room. And it's sending all this noise to the ears. And then the person moves their head, and they can sense the auditory shift in patterns. And their brain starts to interpret that and goes, oh, I sense what's happening. And it rebuilds a three-dimensional construct in their mind of what they're seeing. Their ears become their eyes because a camera was able to translate the visual into an auditory signal. You know, that type of interface is adapting all the time and growing. And there are people now who are able to walk into a room, and with a few clicks, they can sense the dimensions of the room, where things are laid out, and they don't have to use a stick to walk around. I mean, the understanding of abilities are growing, but the interfaces are trying to keep up. And here we are creating new experiences that have to be translated to other things.
So what's interesting, like with screen readers specifically, like that same technology is used for like, so if you use like Google Now or like Siri or anything, that same technology is used to take the information that they pull and turn it into speech for us to hear.
While you're in your car, while you've got headphones on, or, you know, everybody benefited because that level of technology was able to do that.
But what's interesting is like now that it's more like generally used, like there's a lot more like development in making like the voices sound more natural and stuff. So it's kind of like one of the sad things is like, well, until it like hits like a big user market, like it's still not.
And that's why I started out this by saying you are all disabled. If you will accept that and try to understand your strengths and weaknesses, you will be adapting and creating solutions for your problems that others with related disabilities can benefit from. And if you're aware of their disabilities and you feel compassion for them, you're likely to solve their problem too. As soon as Siri started reading content it found online to us, all the web content developers said, oh, I don't want my stuff buried in Flash anymore. It needs to be in standard HTML. Yeah, it's not quite as pretty as I wanted, but it'll be found by Google and these other data sources and read to my users in new ways, built into Google cards, presented to them as looking for something to do, then their web page is now suggested. There's all these benefits because they played in that space. Okay.
In the marketplace, is ADA compliance mainly handled within an organization, or are there other companies that come in and do consulting work for that organization?
It's usually consulting. Sadly, there are very few people who actually study this and try to understand the diversity of accessibility issues. If you read about user experience, UX, UI, you'll get introduced to a lot of the principles of universal design. And so there are a growing group of people who actually apply it. But it's not usually the engineer. It's not a programmer. By the time it gets down there, it's already passed through design and thought and user testing. And oftentimes they'll just tell you, build this. But you're actually making something for somebody that's introducing issues. You have to feel comfortable raising your hand and saying, hey, I built this, but I need to test it to make sure that what I actually made, the materials I used, the experience that was created, met that original need. A lot of companies will build stuff and then put it out there and say, it's not working right. Why not? Now they go do a test. They should have done it upfront. Okay? All right. I think we're out of time. If you guys have any other questions, you're welcome to come chat later. We also, if you deal with anything in web development, I have a team of web developers on campus, and we hire them out all around to different departments. A lot of great real-world experience in this area. So, thank you. Want me to switch back over?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Again, next week we will have a presentation by Brother Grimmett on neural networks. And on Friday, Doug is going to kickstart CodeSpace, and we're going to make some temp posters, I guess, that while we're waiting for the university to get on the bandwagon with the idea of having posters plastered across campus. We make a lot. And there are opportunities for you guys to get prizes. So it's definitely something worth coming, and there's a lot of cool things that we've got in store. So be there. And if you want to keep up to date with ACM, these are the ways to get in touch and stay in contact with us. Getting on the Slack channel, that's one way. Membership registration, that way we have email address and contact info. And then stay tuned. We also have a website. I should put our website on there, which is BYU-Idaho.acm.org. So thank you, everybody, for coming. See you all next week or on Friday, whichever you guys choose, and get going.